I think we're live. Go, Mary.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Community Pulse. I'm Mary Thengvall at Mary_Grace on Twitter.
And I'm Jason Hand at Jason Hand on Twitter.
Today we've got Nathen Harvey and Phil Leggetter with us.
Hello. Yeah, let's hand it off to you guys. Phil, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, okay. Yeah, my name's Phil Leggetter. That's at Leggetter on Twitter. That's Leggetter. Yeah, I've been working in developer relations since 2011. I kind of ended up doing developer relations community because I really enjoyed learning things, creating things, sharing things, and like helping others. So that's kind of how I've got to this position, which at the minute is not having a job, but that should change shortly. Yeah, I've worked previously at Pusher, who are a real-time hosted service. I've done about 3-4 years there, had a gap in the middle, took on a developer evangelist role at a company called Kaplan Systems, who I've worked for about 4 times, building a JavaScript library and trying to build a community around that, and working out what the right type of community was. So I'm really looking forward to sharing any stories that I've got and hearing from others.
Right on, right on. Nathen, why don't you tell our guests a little bit about you?
Sure. Hi, my name is Nathen Harvey. I'm the Vice President of Community Development at Chef. You can follow me on Twitter. You just have to misspell my name. So the rule in my house was Mom picks the name, and Dad misspells them. So, so I'm Nathen Harvey. It's Nathen Harvey on Twitter. So you can follow me there. And I've been with Chef for about 3.5 years, basically in various roles around community development, community management, community evangelism, whatever name you give it, it's all about the community. And I came to Chef after being a user of Chef and sort of falling in love with the community of folks around Chef.
Awesome. And I think maybe the spelling actually is the new correct spelling. Right.
That's right. I totally agree, but there are many, many others in the world whose names sound like mine that disagree.
Well, it just makes it easier for you to get all your social media handles.
That's right. That was the brilliance of my father. He knew that one day we would all, myself and my siblings, would all need a unique way to identify ourselves. Yeah. It was globally unique, so kudos to him. Awesome. We celebrated a birthday yesterday, so happy birthday, Dad.
Oh, happy birthday, Mr. Harvey. Cool. Well, the reason why we wanted to have you two on this show is we decided that this show was going to be about how do you know when it's time to have sort of a lead management role, like a VP of community or a director of community or some sort of kind of senior management role with regards to the community efforts. So we invited you two on here. We thought you guys would be excellent guests for this to kind of hammer through that and share your knowledge with everybody else out there. So with that, maybe our first question is with regard to like the product or the service that your company or your open source or whatever is providing. How do you know when that? Not just the product, but how do you know when it's time to at least start considering it and it's ready to do kind of the next step? Let's start with Phil.
Okay, so it's a really difficult one. There's the obvious thing. So a Pusher, there wasn't really a need to have a head of, to be honest. It was more that the volume simply dictated that it wasn't possible for 2. Sorry, it wasn't possible for 1, so you needed 2. And then as the volume increases and as there's a demand by the business from the marketing perspective, but also in terms of engaging with community to do that more, then there's a need for it, to hire someone else. And then eventually it gets to the point where, well, does this type of company require a structure that means there's a head of? I think it's a really difficult one because sometimes there won't be a need for a head of, other times there will, and it really depends on the company and the culture. At Pusher, it was that, well, interestingly enough, that they're not going to have a head of now I've left. So that role will ultimately fall under marketing. So it really does depend absolutely on what the goals of the company are for community, for developer outreach.
Yeah.
Um,
So real quick, I want to just kind of jump in with something that you just made me think of, but because I think we've seen this, or at least I've noticed this a little bit in some of the other like Slack groups that we're in and Facebook groups that we're in, that there has been an unfortunate number, or it seems like a high number of people that are in community type of roles who their department, their company, their product or whatever decided that we don't really want to try this anymore. We don't want to do this anymore. And so we've seen some people sort of lose their jobs recently. Fortunately, most of them have had no trouble finding another one. But when that happens, it seems like almost every time that I've noticed, it does roll back into sort of the marketing department, whatever efforts we're managing. What do you guys think? Is that the right place for these types of efforts, or does it, again, sort of depend on the product and the service?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think it really depends on the product or service and sort of the type of community that you're trying to build. So Chef, as you might know, sort of has its roots in open source. So it really started off as an open source project before there was a company that was built around that. And so a lot of our community efforts have really been around how do we get more contributors contributing to not just Chef the project, but really Chef the ecosystem. So the tooling that basically is open source that stands up around the Chef framework, and like cookbooks and knife plugins and things like this. So where and how do we find the people that are interested in helping build out that ecosystem? And so that that really falls to a much more technical audience than what you might find in a marketing environment, or sort of a marketing focused. If you look at marketing's job is all about acquisition of leads. We want to acquire leads so that we can hand them off to the sales force, so that we can turn those leads into customers. And community building, while certainly you're going to find and you need to go and acquire new members for your community, community building is really something bigger than or different than just selling a product or selling a service into those people.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree that it really does depend on what you want from your developer relations team. I mean, what happened at Pusher was that we were very small. Because it was an API, it was a software as a service. It was obvious that a good approach. You could look at Twilio, you could look at SendGrid, you could look at a lot of companies with developer evangelists. They raised awareness of their product through having a developer evangelist that would give talks, go to events, meet people, raise awareness. Because it was just me, and I'm quite community focused. I tried to help as many people as possible. I wanted contributions to the SDKs from the community. If possible, contribution to anything, documentation, product feedback. I mean, if you can post a link to the Define Developer Relations post that I did recently, like I did everything that you could possibly do from someone being in developer relations. What's happening at Pusher is that they are growing. They've decided that the focus should be purely evangelism, which is more of the outreach. It's acquisition, really. It's blog posts, talks, and that's where they are. They feel that that's the best approach for them. I guess kind of aligning with what Twilio do. I don't know whether they do a lot of product feedback from that about the evangelist team or not. Maybe they don't need it. Maybe they have product managers who discuss things directly with customers. So right now, Pusher are focusing on the evangelism, the acquisition side of things, and that's the example there. I mean, my next role, this is live, isn't it? So I'm not going to say what that is yet. Will be more focused, reporting to the CTO. Will be developer relations with a focus on making the product better through working with the community to try and get feedback and try and understand what the developers want the service to do.
Yeah, and certainly, I don't want my words to be mistaken. Going after acquisition and going after leads to bring in more sales into your company is absolutely, it's a completely legitimate way to help build your community, and it's a great. Obviously, you need that for the success of your community, as well as for the success of your company, because of course the two kind of are tied hand in hand together. But so a lot of the work that the people on my team at Chef are doing is how do we make it easier for folks to contribute to the open source framework? How do we give commit access to people that don't work at Chef to our open source projects? So there's a lot of work around that as well.
Definitely. And Nathen, this kind of ties back into what you were just saying a little bit, but like having your goals as a community team is one thing. Having those goals tie back into the overall company goals is another thing. And all of those goals should be related. There's an overall company goal of growth and making sure the company succeeds usually. But how do you make sure that you tie your specific goals back up to the overall company goals and make sure that those are aligned in such a way that upper management sees that and everything else too?
Sure, I think it's important that as community managers, as advocates, as evangelists, whatever we are, the first thing that we have to recognize is that we do work at a company, and that company has very specific goals. We need to understand what the goals of that company are and figure out what's the best way for us to contribute to those goals. And I think that within Chef, I've long held this belief that the way that we get more people using Chef is that we expose them to Chef. And Chef, as it turns out, is a very fun and productive framework to work with, not unlike Pusher, not unlike SparkPost. Like, it's a place where I want to use these tools because they make me better, they make me more efficient at my job, they make me, a magician with the things that I need to do, which is important. And I think that once you've discovered these tools, you start to fall in love with them, right? They become such an integral part of your job that then what happens is you want to contribute back. And so in the Chef case, and probably is the same case in many of these other communities, like the way that you contribute back might be tooling, might be blog posts, might be code that make it easier for the next person to come along and find it and get successful with it and fall in love with it. The other type of contributions that you might have are that you end up buying the product. Like, you end up paying my company a monthly fee because you want to use some of our commercial offering. In either case, it's a win-win for both sides of that equation, right? We're always helping each other, sort of feeding that flywheel, if you will. We get it going, and you're contributing. And so back to your question, though, it's important that what we do is we tie that back to what does growth look like at the company? What are the company goals in terms of how do we measure success? So one of the ways that we measure success at Chef, as an example, because we are a subscription-based business, and because that subscription is based on the number of nodes that you're managing with Chef, that becomes a very easy metric for us to look at. How do we make it easier for our customers and community members to deploy more nodes of Chef or manage more nodes with Chef? And anything that we can do to drive towards that and show results from that is a good thing for us to invest in as a company and as a community.
Awesome, awesome, good stuff. So, one of the other things that we were kind of kicking around in terms of kind of interesting things to bring up in this show was, I feel each of us has somebody that we kind of look at as a role model when we get into these roles, and we're like, oh, this person's doing a really good job at that, and you start to pay attention to what some of the other evangelists and advocates are doing out there. And for me, at least, like, Nathen, you're a good example. Like, when I think the very first time I saw you was on that original DevOps video, and I was like, oh, this is really just funny, and interesting. And then I think we met at ChefConf or whatever. But to me, I was immediately able to sort of stick you into this group of that person knows what they're doing. And if I ever feel lost, I want to try to emulate what they're doing, or maybe reach out to that person and say, can you help me? It's a big reason why we had you on the show, and I've talked to you multiple times outside. So for me, you are like somebody I kind of look up to. And Phil, I've done a little bit of looking into you and reading into you, and I saw you have a book that I'm definitely curious about, and I want to go check out this real-time web apps book. So, like, for both of you, we'll start with Phil. Like, who's Phil's Phil, and who's Nathen's Nathen? Like, who are the people that you kind of look up to, and why, I guess?
I mean, there's obvious people in what we do. People like Rob Spector who've done a lot at Twilio. Before him, John Sheehan at Twilio. I really like the approaches that they've taken to this. I really like, and the interesting thing is, at Pusher, I just hired two people that I thought a lot of, and they were both more junior to me in some extent, as in younger. Everyone's younger than me though. But no, I really like the way that they approached what they did. Neither of them were trying to sell anything. They just were naturally, genuinely interested in what they did. So, a guy called Jack Franklin, who's great with JavaScript, a genuine, like, nice guy, wants to share, naturally wants to do that sort of stuff. And someone else called Ben Foxall, who, in the real-time scene anyway, just wanted to inspire, wanted to share and inspire. So both of those people have been, in some ways, strange. Ultimately I wanted them to work with me, but just the way they approached what they did. Obviously, as I said, Rob Spector, John Sheehan. Really anybody that's honest and open, and that's Kin Lane has been since 2010 when we were both running for Programmable Web. The open and honest way that he's independent, so he's fortunate enough that he's never pushing a product other than himself as a consultant. I really like the way he approaches everything being a conversation, rather than him, although he's the API evangelist, he's not really evangelizing, and he's just saying, this is what I think, what do you think? I really like that approach to things. And that's ultimately what I try and do as well. I never want to say that I'm the person that knows everything, but I want to share what I know and then make it a conversation if possible, whether that's after the talk or online or Hangouts or whatever. They've been really influential. And people like Gary Vaynerchuk, who I know is not in developer relations, but the way that he talks about things like jab, 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 right hook, where it's give, 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 and then eventually if you get to the point you've given, you say at some point, hey, any chance that I could ask for something back? And I take that on quite a lot when I give talks. And someone else called Ian Sanders has been a big inspiration in terms of accepting that you do many things. The role that we have, it's not, you don't just write content, you don't just give talks, you don't just contribute to product. You do so many different things, and he talks about having multiple strings to your bow. So they've been very influential to me.
Cool. Nathen, what about you?
Yeah, for my part, I think that there are some obvious folks sort of in my career and in my life and in the community that are great mentors. I look at my boss, Adam Jacob, who wrote Chef when it was a blank screen. Of course, he's a good mentor for me. I look back at, of course, maybe not of course, but I run a podcast called The Food Fight Show, and when I run that show today, but it was started by another guy in the Chef community, Brian Barry, and I've always looked up to him as a great mentor. In fact, I wouldn't work at Chef if it weren't for Brian. He kind of pushed me to take on this job. But then I also look sort of outside of the industry, outside of community evangelists and even community developers. I look at people like Ira Glass or PRX, the Radiotopia folks that do a bunch of podcasts. I think that, like, for us as community evangelists and developer advocates, one of the things that we have to be really good at is telling stories. And I think the best way to tell a better story is to listen to a bunch of stories. And so I do try to incorporate a lot of that into my sort of daily or regular life, listen to a lot of podcasts, listen to a bunch of stories, so that hopefully I can become a better storyteller through that. I also look at other mentors within the organization. You talk about how do we make sure that the organization values the work that community evangelists do. We have to understand, it's just like DevOps, we have to understand what the other areas of the organization do themselves and what do they care about. So talk to the folks in sales, talk to the folks in marketing, talk to the folks in finance, really understand what are their concerns, what are they thinking about on a day-to-day basis, and take that and internalize that and figure out, how do we get better at what we do.
Yeah, real quick, that's a kind of an interesting idea that I just sparked a little memory in my head from a while ago, and I think one of the big reasons why this became a question for me, one, at VictorOps, we're trying to determine, what's the future of evangelism and where am I taking this whole thing, and I'm actually part of the product team, but I'm sort of an agent of the marketing department and help them out in a bunch of ways, which I actually love because it lets me put on my creative hat and and be that kind of role for a while. But because I sort of wear a lot of hats and because I sort of rotate around, but I really only sort of work for one department, sometimes I do feel like I'm out of the loop, or maybe I'm not keeping people in the loop as well. And of course, we can do email updates and stay in touch over, group chat or whatever. But it seemed to me that the efforts of what we're trying to do with the evangelism stuff, there's a lot that goes on, and a lot of it has huge payouts, and sometimes not. But it just seems like so much of what gets done actually does have a big impact, and if it's not making its way all the way to management and all the way up maybe into the board even, then maybe they're not really seeing the full picture. And so to me, it seemed like it had gotten to a point where the community efforts were so important that they didn't need to be buried down deeper in the corporate structure of the org chart or whatever. And I think a big part of kind of what you just said there is making sure that you understand and you empathize with other areas of the company, of the other areas of the organization, and that they feel the same for you. Because especially as evangelists, we're kind of behind the scenes in a lot of cases. We're on airplanes, we're at conferences, we're not always highly visible, and so because of that, especially for some people, that is troublesome or worrisome for some, because they don't know, if they don't see you, they feel like that you're probably not doing anything.
It's kind of that dichotomy, right? You're highly visible in the community, but your visibility within the four walls, if you will, of your own company maybe can suffer from that.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll come back from a long trip somewhere, and people will ask me, where I've been, what I've been up to, and my initial response is, well, weren't you following me on Twitter? Like, you should know exactly what's going on.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Like, that's a huge way of how we show what's going on these days. It's a lot of how we talk to people and interact with people and let people know where we are, as well as what else is going on in the community. And actually, I was gonna head a different direction with this, but now that we're talking about it, I'd love to talk a little bit about just the KPIs and metrics side of things. Like, that is part of how we interact with the community and how we talk to people and have those interactions, but how do we take those things and make them more tangible to other people in the company and help them understand what it is that we're actually doing?
Shall I take this?
Sure.
Yeah, as you say, metrics is really important. The interesting thing, and I totally agree about the Twitter, sharing what you're doing on social channels is absolutely what you do. It's about transparency, it's about sharing what you're doing, and you kind of assume that others consume that. But I've worked at so many, in the two companies that I've worked in developer relations, I would say that the vast majority of both of the companies I worked at, other people weren't using social networks. They weren't using Twitter, or they weren't using the social channels that the developer relations teams were publishing their content on. They wouldn't read the blog posts. They wouldn't be following you on Twitter. They wouldn't be following the company profile on Twitter. They wouldn't amplify the work that was being done by the community team. So, going back to the point in the metrics or demonstrating the value, is that it's so important to demonstrate the value in many companies to get that team, to get buy-in to the developer relations and the community roles. And I think different companies at different stages are more on board with that. So the company that I'm joining, they've had a very small developer relations team. So I feel very much that we need to grow the team, and from the off, advocate for what we're doing internally as much as we do externally. We've got to show the benefits of it, and the metrics are absolutely key to that. And I think the metrics really depend on the sort of product you've got. With the software as a service, it's great because you've got, if there are libraries, installs from libraries, interactions with those libraries from with your APIs, obviously usage of the platform, signups. You've got a lot of stats that you can build on. I think it's more difficult for other products to deal with that sort of thing. So, but very much part of that is to make sure that you have those metrics, you are capturing that data, and you have at least a platform to show that on, whether it's whether it is an email update, whether it's a company meeting, whether it's a weekly update. There's got to be something within that company that allows you to put this in front of everybody, and even with the emails to .all or whatever the group is to everybody, emails aren't always read. So there's got to be, you've got to make sure that the business decision makers within the organization put you in a position where you can say, hey, here's what we've done and here's been the ROI from it. That's really important, because even if the CEO completely believes in this and they do read the emails, you're not going to get the buy-in from the rest of the company without them understanding the value. And the best community outreach for me is when everybody's involved. So, getting, for instance, the company at Pusher, we managed to get a few of the engineers giving talks, which was great. They became part of that community as well, that community outreach, because I think they saw some of the value of doing the developer relations activities.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that we look at what's our role as a community advocate, and many times we're out there trying to amplify the voices and amplify the successes that are happening within our community. But don't let the cobbler's kids have no shoes, right? You have to go back with your own peers and amplify the successes that you're driving and sort of tell those stories. When we're out on the road, we tend to be multi-channel savvy, right? You're using Twitter, you're using Foursquare, you're like talking to people. Don't, as you mentioned, don't expect that one email is going to get read by everyone. Like bang your drum. You have to do some of your own evangelism within your own community. And then I think really the key thing that you touched on there was enlist the rest of the company. As it turns out, like within a company, we are all community managers, or we are all community advocates. And from time to time, we play a more or less visible role in that community advocacy or customer advocacy. And so find the folks internally, whether it's engineers, whether it's salespeople, whether it's support engineers, whomever it is, and try to get them some time in the spotlight. Try to get them interacting with customers in the ways that they're comfortable interacting with customers and interacting with the community.
Yeah, I think that's a really important kind of comment there, and something that we've been focusing on a lot more is getting our engineers and even our sales and marketing people submitting abstracts, submitting CFPs to different events, because it's important that they not only sort of have a better empathy and understanding for what the evangelism role is, but also it just sort of helps with the overall kind of company image and brand when it goes beyond just the evangelist or just the typical people who show up at conferences. I think it makes a huge difference. So anyway, that's a really great point. One other thing I kind of wanted to touch on is, kind of circling back to when do you know that it's time to sort of get your evangelism and your community stuff kind of leveled up. Is I guess we'll start with you, Nathen. But what let's just say skill set sort of changes as you go from the early phases of developing community up into maybe where you are right now as VP, but you manage other people who are doing it. How does that role differ, and what types of skills get sort of traded off or switched around in that process?
Yeah, sure. I think that part of it, like I can definitely speak to my experience, and that's exactly what I'll do. And of course, my experience is driven by the company where I'm at and sort of the skill sets that are required there. So when I came to Chef as a Chef user. So I'd been using Chef to sort of manage my own infrastructure. I was a user of the tool. I came on board and I was doing some training as well as some community outreach and evangelism. And over my tenure here at Chef, we've kind of grown the role, grown the department, and there are folks on my team who are definitely engineers, and the best way for them to interact with the community, for some of the folks on my team, is through code, through pull requests, through it's not going out to speak, but it's really recognizing that is that's a legitimate interaction with the community, and so I'm managing engineers now, which is different than like we run a software development lifecycle process where we have we do agile practices. We have daily stand-ups. We have tickets that we're working through, a Kanban board, minimizing our work in progress, all of that stuff. So like For me, coming from an infrastructure and operations background, and then applying that same sort of practice, if you will, to some of the community outreach and community advocacy stuff that we're doing, it kind of fits. But it's different than what you might think I would work on a regular basis, right? I put on a ridiculous costume and have eggs thrown at me on one day, and then the next day I'm running a retrospective for a team of 6 or 7 developers around what have we done over the past 2 weeks, like how's our process working.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that answers the question though.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had the same experience in that I came from a software engineering background, moving into evangelism. I was a headless chicken. Didn't really, it was 2011. There were a few other evangelists. I mean, in the UK and Europe, specifically software as a service, and so I could look at what they were doing and try and do what they were doing. But I also did, 100% of Push's support, built libraries, wrote the documentation. So there was all this, and there was no process involved in anything other than, right, what do I need to do now? I mean, as the team grew, and as we hired, engineers ultimately, and had more to manage and more people to manage, then we adopted, development workflows and agile processes, and it was very much like engineering. In fact, I know in some cases it felt like we were a bit more organized than some of the engineering processes, or at least it was a lot more visible to the rest of the company what was going on, because we wanted to share what we're doing and so on. From the content we created through events management, everything was driven through Jira, to be honest, and we had Confluence and forms to fill in, but it kept that visibility, it kept it on track, so we knew what we were doing. I mean, the main job change for me really was that I always loved going to hackathons. I loved writing the content and getting the kudos for for the stuff that's out there and getting the sign-ups and so on, and that changed. I got less sexy work to do, unfortunately, but that was disappointing. But I understood that, and in many ways I was as grateful for the success that the others were seeing, that I felt helping, mentoring and so on.
Yeah, I think another thing that is really important. You asked about the skills. What are the skills that are required? And from my perspective,
hold on real quick, Phil, you may need to mute yourself real quick. I think we're getting some feedback.
Let's see, is that better?
Try now, Nathan.
How's that? Much better, huh?
Yeah. Much better. Yeah, let's start that over.
That's cool. I only hear one of me now. That's definitely better. So, back to your question around skills, I think, if you ask Phil, if you ask me, if you ask Mary, if you ask Jason, I would posit that none of us, we didn't study community building in college or in any sort of formal way, right? The important thing is that we're here and we're kind of sort of figuring things out as we go. None of us knows how to do this the best way possible. And you can pick up Jono's book on community building and you can read that, but that it's a great read for sure, but that's not going to turn you into the best community advocate or community manager overnight. The thing that you have to do is go out and practice that trade. You have to go out and you're going to figure it out. You have to go and be ready to listen. For me, the true superpower of a good sort of community evangelist or a community advocate is that you bring awesome people into a room together, whether that room is a physical room or a virtual room, it doesn't matter. You gather the awesome people together, and then you kind of stand back and don't try to guide or direct the awesome that will be created by those people. You stand back and let them do their thing, and you will always be impressed by the results.
Yeah, I know. For me, well, I feel exactly the same way that you do. And one of the other things I kind of wanted to mention is, as I think about this role that I'm in and how it's going to evolve over time and change, there's going to be some things that I'm going to miss. But at the same time, I'm also not going to miss them. An evangelist has to do a ton of travel. And in my mind, that's really awesome. I love that until the end of the year, and I'm tired, and I'm probably coming down with something, and I feel like I'm being pulled in a million different directions, and all I want to do is just tell everybody no and stay in bed for a week or something like that. So, like, if I got to a point where I didn't do as much travel, part of me would be really excited about that, but also I know I'm going to miss those interactions with everybody. I'm going to miss seeing all three of you at some event in some unknown, city that I've never been to. And I don't know. I just feel like there's going to be some things that change over time, and there'll be new experiences and new challenges for sure. But some of the things that you have to do early on are actually kind of what excite me, and I worry that I won't have the opportunity, or I'll have to offload those chores to somebody else, and actually I enjoyed those things. So I don't know. Maybe we'll start with Phil. Do you have any comments on? Is there anything kind of like that you used to do, but now you don't do quite as much, and you kind of miss that?
Well, there was definitely the content creation. I really did miss creating content and then seeing where it would end up and how it would be amplified. But we had, in many ways, we had better people for that. Like the guy Jack Franklin that I mentioned. He's already got a name in the JavaScript community, so it made sense for him to be building this stuff, sharing his ideas. I really like, one of my things is real-time technology, so I really like being out there talking about where I think this technology is going. The interesting thing with my next role is that I will be head of again, and we will have a growing team, and I'm not quite sure how much content I'll be creating and how many talks I'll be giving and how much it will be around again, because the company's focus is developer feedback, community feedback on the product. So will there be as much of that awareness-focused activity from the whole team or from me at all? But I'm still not really that sure yet. I've got a bit of a plan in place, but nothing specific. So, the traditional evangelism stuff is really great, right? You're out there, you're sharing stuff, you're creating things, you're learning, you're helping others. I think as you move I guess to a more administrative role or something, that the chances to do that diminish.
Yeah, I think that as community advocates, one of the traits I think of a really good community advocate is you have a pretty high level of FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. And so as you grow a team, and as you have other people in the organization or in the community that can help you, that FOMO, it's hard and it's strong. I miss doing, I want to go to all of the things. Unfortunately, there's only one of me, and like you said, Jason, there can be a huge travel commitment. And sometimes it's just impractical, and oftentimes it's impossible. It's certainly, as far as I know, still impossible to be at two places at once, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
Well, Phil figured out how to clone himself earlier, so.
That's true. Google Hangouts is the one place you can be two places at once, but really it's just two of you in the same place, and one of you usually frozen. So we're only halfway there, I think. But we'll get there. So I think that I remember maybe once every 6 months I'll sit down and I'll write maybe a cookbook from scratch. I'll sit down and write some code. And I remember how fun that is, and that's not something I get to do on a daily basis. And but like Phil said, that there are people that are way smarter and better at that than me, and it's not the place that I'm going to be the best person at that thing. And so I'm happy to let others do that. I definitely want to go and give every talk everywhere. But also, people don't always want to hear from me. We have to have other voices that are out there telling the stories and sharing their perspectives.
So along those lines, I know it's hard to give certain things up. I know it's hard to know that you're missing out on stuff that you really want to be involved in. I also know, both personally and from colleagues of mine and friends of mine, that it's hard to even just keep up with the day-to-day stuff. So how do you make sure that you don't burn out? How do you make sure your team doesn't burn out? How do you make sure that the things that people want to do are the things that they're able to do, as well as balancing out the things that they need to be doing? It's the mystery, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think everything comes down to communication, doesn't it? So you need to have a plan in place. You've got to have lots of communication between the team, make sure that everybody's career objectives are being fulfilled, the company goals are being fulfilled, that you're doing the right things based on like your current projects. It is really hard, but absolutely everything for me comes down to communication. I mean, it's an obvious like blanket statement, but any problems that I've seen within organizations or with something going wrong, there's been something that's broken down in terms of communication. Someone hasn't said something, someone hasn't shared something. And I think, to solve all of those things, you've got to make sure that you're constantly communicating with your team, making the right decisions, planning properly. That's why I guess certain people are put in charge of certain things, because they're better at planning, better at thinking ahead. Some people are better at focusing, some people are better at stepping back and taking a broader look at things. So I haven't answered that, but I think it's a difficult one, right?
Yeah, from my perspective, if I go back to, you asked about mentors earlier, and I mentioned Brian Barry, and he's the reason that I'm at Chef. When he first asked me if I would ever consider working at OpsCode, the immediate answer out of my mouth was no, because number one, I'm not smart enough. Number two, the travel schedule would be ridiculous, and it wouldn't be good for me and my family. I couldn't support that. And here I am 3.5 years later, and if you asked me if I wanted to work at Chef, I would probably say no, I'm not smart enough, and the travel schedule is something that just will not work for me and my family. It's definitely the place where I am. I travel a whole lot more sometimes than I want to. But there's this trade-off. The work that I do when I'm on the road is so energizing and so helpful that it really does, it kind of pays itself back. It helps prevent me from burning out. I do think, though, back to Phil's point about communication, there have been at least a half a dozen times where while at Chef, within 24 hours of needing to be at a place, something in my personal life happens, and then what happens is that thing where I'm supposed to be on the West Coast tomorrow morning, it's off the table. It's just not going to happen. And it comes down to communication and making sure that, as a team, we understand and can support each other. And so as a manager, I'm always very supportive. I feel, and I hope that people on my team feel this way, that I'm always very supportive of, you need to do the thing that's right for you first, because going to that conference next week, it's important for Chef as a company. Having you not burn out and being able to go to the conference that happens 2 weeks out, and the one that happens 4 weeks out, and this other event that happens in 3 months, that's more important than any single conference. And I think that we try to put the people first and really understand what I can't have you do is burn out, because it doesn't serve any of us very well.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Burnout's obviously a huge issue for sort of our little slice of this industry, and for good reason. I mean, we work hard, we hustle, we're traveling all the time, we're basically, in many cases, kind of just always on, working around the clock. I feel like if I'm not asleep, I'm working, even if it's just thinking, thinking through things I need to do or brainstorming on just my own. So it's hard to disconnect, and paying attention to all that stuff, I think, is very important, especially from a managerial position where you've got other people that you need to kind of watch out for them. So anyway, we're going to have a short on
the burnout topic, if I may. I feel like there's obviously there are a bunch of contributing factors to burnout. The two that I try to watch out for most, one is just sheer exhaustion, right? So if I'm traveling weeks and weeks on end, and staying up and sleeping very little, at some point I'm just going to be I'm going to hit a wall and just fall over and be no good to anyone. The other side of it, I think, also the biggest contributing factor from my perspective is looking at the work that you're doing. Sometimes the sheer number of hours that you're working doesn't matter if the work that you're doing is energizing work. You're gaining energy from doing that work. But let's be honest, what we're doing is work. Work is not like not necessarily fun all the time. So sometimes we have to just buckle down and do work that is draining work. And it's that draining work that really, it takes away, you have the deposits from the energizing work, you have the withdrawals from the draining work, and you have to make sure that those two stay in balance, because I think that really, doing too much draining work, draining from your personality, like drains my soul, that is the work that really leads to burnout.
Yeah, very true. So we're getting a little short on time, and so maybe just sort of circle back around one last time before we get into our checkouts, and I'll just ask each of you the same question. Just give me a real quick response. How do you know when it's time to have upper management community? Phil, we'll start with you.
To scale. It's as simple as that, I think. If you need to scale, you need someone to take a step back and, if nothing else, coordinate things.
Okay. Good.
And my answer is you enlist other parts of the organization to help you build community. But then you will reach a scale where the consultants need to be consultants, the trainers need to be trainers, the solutions architects need to go and architect some solutions, at which point it will become obvious that what we need is more capacity to do this community outreach and evangelism, and let's start growing that team. And you should really let it grow organically. If you try to preempt it, that can lead to real problems, I think.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Cool. So let's wrap this up. We always do a check it out portion at the end of the episode. So are there any tools, projects, events, blog posts, people that you like to follow, books you like to read, things that you think our listeners should look into with regard to building community, and specifically with leadership and management tools?
Well, I think the DevRelCon event that was in London, and there's one in San Francisco, I'm sure this one in San Francisco will be great. I can't make it, but the London event, there was a lot shared and a lot to take away from that. Definitely, I think if you're interested in this, then obviously the Evangelist Collective, the Slack group seems immense. The amount of people in there, that's definitely worth checking out. In terms of management tools for what we do, I mean, both Pusher and the company I'm joining are using Atlassian, Jira, Confluence. I don't know. It feels to me it feels a little heavyweight to me. I would love there to be lighter tools, because it feels like we're quite an agile group of people. I would feel happier if there were a lighter tool for managing community activities anyway for a developer relations team. So hopefully one of you knows one or more.
Yeah, I know there's a few different Kanban programs out there, and Kanban Lite of sorts. There's Trello and things like that, obviously. There's also another one called Asana that we've been digging into a little bit. Allows you to have things on a calendar and list of tasks and things that are coming up and stuff like that, which maintains the Kanban-esque feel, but not as heavy as some of the Jira and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried Atlassian, Trello, a bunch of Kanban things. I don't know what it is. We've looked for event-specific management functionality, then making sure that things are in calendars. Ultimately, the general tools that we use anyway, the social tools, email, on Google Calendar, whatever calendar system, you've got something that just naturally fits with that, and I haven't found anything yet.
Right. Well, we were just talking about doing an episode on tools, so maybe that one will be up next.
Yeah. Nathen, you got any secrets that you like to share with us about different events and books and tools?
Yeah, for sure. So I feel required to plug some events. So Chef Conf is coming up in July. The CFP is currently open for that, and I'm very much involved in putting on that conference. It's happening in July in Austin, Texas. But actually before that, I'm helping organize DevOps Days DC. That's going to happen June 8th and 9th in Washington, D.C., as the name implies. But actually, that's a lie. It's actually being held in Alexandria, Virginia, which is just outside of D.C. So the CFP for both of those is open now if you'd like to come and speak. But I think it's kind of a hack as community organizers. It's important that we participate in other communities. Go to a conference that is outside of your comfort zone or outside of the technology, or maybe just outside of technology altogether. Like go to a conference and see how does that community interact. What are some things that they do there? And from a tool perspective, Chef obviously being open source, we are currently on my team looking at a tool that Netflix recently open sourced called the OSS Tracker. And what it will do, although I haven't seen it in action just yet, but it will look after, say, your GitHub repositories for an organization and give you metrics on things like how long do pull requests sit, what's sort of the velocity of issues, and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to standing that up in a prototype area, make sure that it's showing some good data to us, and then sharing that with the community.
Awesome. Yeah, I had heard about that, but haven't yet seen anybody put it into action. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that works out for you. One of the things that I'm sort of starting to notice with all the tools is that, one, there's always new tools coming out, and a lot of them, they've been out for a while. All of a sudden, they pass a threshold of maturity where they become a whole lot more useful. But it still seems like there's a lot of them out there that just are very specific in what they do, and they probably will always remain very specific. And so what I have enjoyed doing a lot lately is actually using Zapier. I'm not sure if it's Zapier or Zapier, but using that service to get all of them to sort of talk to each other. And basically, if something happens on Twitter, it goes into a Google Doc. If it gets into a Google Doc and needs to be in Salesforce, it goes over there. So just sort of getting the pipeline plugged in with that tool has been beneficial to us. At least, just if nothing else, really just documenting things that take place. Maybe I'm not great with going in and updating things, but it's sort of a passive thing that's really nice to see happen. So that's my advice on any check it outs is check it out Zapier. Does anybody know which way that's pronounced? For sure.
You build zaps, don't you? So I've gone with Zapier.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. But then it's right there in the middle of the name is API, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's Zapier or something like that.
Maybe someone will comment on Twitter and let us know what the correct pronunciation is.
Somebody who works there.
There you go.
Let us know.
Good stuff.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time, but this has been awesome having both of you, Phil and Nathen, on the show. And
thanks very much for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Thanks, Jason. Great to meet you, Nathen.
Yeah, and I don't know. Sometime we'll definitely cross paths at an event coming soon, and we'll be sharing all the stuff that we talked about here on the episode. We'll be making sure that those get into some show notes and they get up on the website, and we'll be sharing all that, of course, through the website and on social media, hopefully pretty soon. And yeah, I guess with that, Mary, you want to take us away?
Sure. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm Mary Thengvall at Mary_Grace on Twitter.
And I'm Jason Hand at Jason Hand on Twitter. And it's been awesome having our guests Phil and Nathen. And join us again next time on another episode of Community Pulse.